Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our environmental justice teach-in today. Your speakers are just going to be me, Jen Walling, the Executive Director of the Illinois Environmental Council, and Kim, who will introduce herself as well. I'm very excited to talk to you about the bill today, and we actually have a bill number as of a few moments ago. So that's really exciting for our lobby day. And thank you to everybody who's participating in our lobby day. Our format here is Kim's going to talk about like where the issues that are going on, where this bill came from, the community process being used to put it together. And then I'm going to talk about specifically what's in the bill. And also, it's a little weird because there's not full bill numbers and there's stuff we're working on still, but I know everybody here can handle it because this is really important. So it's really being elevated to that level of you know, having some differences happening with the bill number. So we're going to talk to you about how you deal with that as well. And so I'm going to pass it off to Kim Wasserman from Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, just to talk about about all of this. So thanks, Kim. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Jen. I really appreciate it. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kim Wasserman, Executive Director at the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. And I also come to you today representing the Chicago Environmental Justice Network, which is a network of about 5 environmental justice organizations located in Chicago. And just to be clear on who we're talking about, we are talking about BIG, Blacks in Green. We are talking about LVEJO, the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. We are talking about the Southside Coalition to Ban Pet Coke, People for Community Recovery, and the Southeast Environmental Task Force. And so the collective group that we make up, and we make up the Chicago Environmental Justice Network, we collectively have been dealing with a lot of different environmental justice issues in our communities for the last 20 plus years. And in an effort to try to rectify of what really is a lot of the policies that allow for environmental racism to happen in our neighborhood, we found ourselves really talking about what is a change that we need to see at a citywide level and what is a change that we need to see at a statewide level. And the fact of the matter is that we have not had much success moving the mayor on environmental justice for numerous reasons. And so we decided to focus our attention then to Springfield and figure out how we could make improvements to environmental justice regulations, environmental justice language in general for the state. I am happy to say that the conversations we've been having with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency and the governor's office have been well received, and the changes that we're looking to make, or the legislation that we're looking to introduce, seems to be well received, which we're really excited about. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about like how we came to this space and what it is that we're asking for, and then I'll hand it back over to Jen to get into more details. But again, this is really based on what is it exactly that folks are dealing with in their neighborhood. And I'm going to bring up a couple of spaces or a couple of examples that really led us down this path. First and foremost is the continued permitting around the General Iron facility that's moving from Lincoln Park to the southeast side. And what is the role that IEPA played or plays in the siting of that, if any? The second one is matte asphalt in the McKinley Park neighborhood. A similar question in the sense that that asphalt plant is literally right across the street from a public park, and I think about 500 feet away from a local elementary school. And so really the question of like, how is it that these places can be sited so close to community, in this case, particularly environmental justice communities. And then lastly, the Hilco site, which is where there's going to be a 1 million square foot warehouse and thousands of diesel trucks. And so these collective fights that we have been doing in our neighborhood really, as I mentioned, cause us to want to understand who decides where these things go, what is the process, and how can we fix the system that creates and perpetuates environmental racism. And so as we came together as organizations to try to understand the process that the state does, as we came together to try to understand what the city does, it became clear to us that there were some gaps in both spaces that we might be able to, as I mentioned, rectify through this legislation. So to give you a sense of some of the things that we are proposing, I should mention, I am also the chairperson for the Illinois Environmental Justice Commission. And through that space, we were able to support IEPA and the original LVEJO bill around the creation of the Solar for All mapping program that really looked to identify environmental justice communities. And so we had tried in that first round to get that mapping program to not just be used for Solar for All, but actually be used across the board for Illinois EPA to understand where are environmental justice communities and to allow for communities to self-identify as environmental justice communities. Unfortunately, we did not win that fight with the original legislation. So we are back again to try to convince Illinois EPA and the governor's office that they really should have a more robust mapping process for how environmental justice communities in Illinois are identified using a number of different factors that we work through around cumulative impact. But again, also allowing for communities to self-identify should they need to. So that is one of the things that we're currently asking for through this legislation is a broader definition of environmental justice that actually includes cumulative impact. The second thing that we are asking is for the opportunity to have more inclusion of languages when it comes to information that is provided. Currently, we're only seeing things primarily in English with some Spanish. But the fact of the matter is there is a very diverse language set across Illinois, much less in Chicago. And so we are asking for translations of documents to go across the board for our communities. We're also asking for things like an ability to provide a grievance process for community members should they feel that that they're being discriminated against. Currently, that is not provided to us as a community. And so we really want to be able to go in and say, hey, we feel like we have a right to bring a grievance against this industry for X, Y, and Z reason. And so again, based on the experience that communities have had, dealing with environmental racism issues in their own backyards. And so a lot of these ideas were culminated from communities and what they were dealing with, and also these communities understanding what the solution to some of those issues might be. The last thing I'll mention is that we're also asking for the ability for the director of IEPA to actually ask for more time to make decisions so that he can gather more information. These are all things where we've heard from IEPA that they didn't have enough time, enough information. And so we really want to empower IEPA to be able to be more supportive of environmental justice communities, but also be more supportive of environmental justice at large in the state, which currently they really cannot do. So I'll stop there. Jen, hopefully that was helpful. But if folks have any questions, I will be on for the rest of the call. And if anybody wants to ask me anything, I'll be happy to answer it.
Sure. I'm going to just, Kim really explained all of those, but I'm going to put up a little fact sheet for you all to look at. I know that Paloma just put this in the chat, but I'm going to go through some of the items that are in the currently introduced bill, and then I'm going to talk about like where it's at in the status. And then we'll take any questions that folks may have. So this is a little bit of a fact sheet, and then there is an action alert too for CEJN. Maybe Paloma, you could put that in the chat too. So yeah, so right now this is House Bill 3090 Amendment 1, and I will also put that up so we can take a look at it so you can see what the different things say, and it's all together. So these are 6, although I kind of cheat a little bit because some of these have the word "and." So there's more like 10 items, but 6 seemed like nice. I don't know. So I'm going to go through just, Kim covered these, but I'll tell you what they are in law and where we're headed here. So we do want to make sure we're defining environmental justice communities in a way that recognizes cumulative impact and allows self-identification. The Solar for All definition was one that there's been a lot of work done on. So we want to make sure that we're not just putting in the US EPA EJ screen and just like layering it down. It is quick, but there's a lot of problems with it, especially in downstate communities, because the city of Chicago may have really big, bulky sorts of pollution, but you may have one area in like Champaign or Decatur where all of the industry goes, and it has a lot of low income, particularly Black and brown people that live around it. So we got to make sure that we're hitting those communities as well and seeking justice for them. So the next part is expanding public and community participation, requiring in-person public hearings in the community where they were impacted, providing written and oral translation services. Even if the community didn't ask for it, you have to do it. And there's a linguistic isolation definition using the US Census Bureau that looks at language, self-reported language skills. And if 20% or more of the community is that, then you have to provide language skills, language in any of those anybody that's 20% or more, which is great. And of course, it doesn't restrict them from providing translation services otherwise, and we'd really encourage them to do so. We want to provide a grievance procedure, and this is really a civil rights issue that allows anybody discriminated by IEPA to file a complaint. We're really looking at connecting that to the Department of Human Rights and having it not just on race, but like actual perceived race, not just on gender, but gender identity or expression. So making sure that we're taking into account a lot of our different allies that may have been discriminated against by IEPA. There's a project bank for fines and fees. And so this is when fines and fees are collected by IEPA from permit violations, from permit fees that wouldn't otherwise be going to like pay people that work there. We would take the project bank, well, the way we have it drafted right now, the money goes in there and then EJ communities have a say in what happens with the money. You know, in negotiations, it's how to connect to that, because, you know, we talked to Southeast Environmental Task Force and they talked about an air pollution violation that happened in their neighborhood, and the corporation, what they did as a project was lead remediation, and, you know, very disconnected, and also like kind of not quite even in the same area. So they were very concerned about that. And that's an example of what we don't want to happen. We also want to require an environmental justice assessment for cumulative impact for any new pollution source in the EJ area. This is also something that is up for discussion right now, which permits and when. There are, it's called a CAP permit, is a Clean Air Act permit. And those are the permits for the biggest, baddest pollution sources in the state. And it's not just manufacturers that have them. There's other places like schools that might have, or universities that might have them, even public governments and sometimes, but a CAP permit is like the biggest, baddest permit. But we want to make sure that whenever, you know, there's air issues, that's what we're looking at. And I will say this bill is super focused on air. There are environmental justice issues that happen with land and water, but you know, talking to CEJN, you know, Keith Harley has said 99% of the EJ issues that happen are air. And I think there's a few reasons for that, although I think we will continue to look at this and continue to look at water, and land. The Bureau of Land is really waste management, and there's definitely some waste management issues. But you know, a lot of that has to do with like local zoning and that sort of stuff, not necessarily the permit. So there's other issues we're still going to need to work on. This one addresses air permits, which is really the biggest. And then looking at, as Kim said, this is particular to general iron, extending deadlines required and requiring IEPA to deny permits for environmental violations. And I missed, actually, in number 3, we have the grievance procedure, but we also have standing to impacted communities to challenge a siting permit in court, which I know many of you, particularly folks from the Sierra Club, you've been really involved with our standing in the past. Illinois law on standing is awful. And it's such that like there's a second appellate court case that says that the only people who have standing in a siting issue may be the applicant of the permit and the agency. So if you're a neighbor of the site, you can't challenge it. If you're going to be impacted by the pollution from the site, you can't challenge it. And so that's a real challenge for these siting permits for air. And it leaves us like with the general iron case, for example, nobody has standing to challenge the air permit that was issued in that case. And so nobody can go and say, we don't think the IEPA did its job, court, can you review it? And that really leaves us without judicial review of the agency decision. And, you know, they can keep saying, oh, we can't deny permits, we're not allowed to, except when they did it to the Surgenics case in a white community. So we can't deny permits. This is a little bit of, you know, the items that are in it. This is the fact sheet that you're going to be given for lobby day. We'll make sure that people all have this, and it's going to be, you know, there's complexity here because it's right now we have it introduced as HB 3090 Amendment 1, and it's a bill from Representative Sonia Harper. And then in the Senate, we have Selena Villanueva and Senator Robert Peters are champions on this issue. But we're really starting it in the House with Representative Sonia Harper. And so we are talking with the governor's office and the IEPA because we'd really like to have language that those parties agree to. And I think that you can say that when you're talking to lawmakers, you can say that environmental justice organizations are working with the IEPA to figure out what the best way to approach this is. I think the fact sheet we have also has a little bit about each community. So it has General Iron, it has Hilco, it has the asphalt plant. So you can talk a little bit about experiences in those communities. But when you talk to the lawmakers, you're going to want to say, we want you to sponsor this, or we want you to sponsor and support environmental justice legislation that comes from environmental justice communities. So I think that is the really important ask. We'll have that on the pitch sheet, that it comes from those communities. I think those two things are really critical. And so it is going to be a little weird because we don't fully have bills and it's not fully baked. But I think it's really important to get the word out about it, to let lawmakers know about these issues and that you care about them, and you're going to be making a big difference in how this moves forward. So I see a lot of questions, but I see, Peter, you have your hand raised. Do you want to take yourself off mute and ask the question?
Yes.
Peter? Go ahead.
Thank you. What I want to understand is it only the state legislature that can reverse the challenge of the high bar on standing?
Yes.
Because it's ridiculous. I mean, in my opinion, it's ridiculous.
Well, mostly, so there's a bunch of different cases that lead to that result. The worst one being this Holmes versus Bose in Galena, which is the second appellate court. So that case is really what has contributed most of the case law. But there's also some issues at the Pollution Control Board where there have been some definition of standing. And so the only other way, other than the state legislature doing this, would be for the Illinois Supreme Court to weigh in. And they haven't fully weighed in on the standing issue. Like the Holmes versus Bose case was not appealed to the Supreme Court in Illinois. Also, there was a Starved Rock mining case that was not appealed to the Supreme Court. And it's awful because every time we introduce this stuff on standing, the industry is always like, well, somebody in a polar bear costume in Alaska is going to want to sue on this, so we need to lower the bar. But there's actually standing for a number of other cases. So we talked about water, and for water, anybody can challenge an NPDES permit. Like literally anybody in the entire country can challenge any NPDES permit that's been issued. And you're not seeing a huge onslaught of pieces of legislation there. So that's the answer there. We have to do it at the state level, and this does include it.
Is there time for another question?
Sure, go ahead, and then I'll head to
Okay.
the other ones there.
Local zoning ordinances, you're saying are completely disconnected from land use permitting. It sounded like that's what you were saying before.
No, I was just trying to, mostly that this is an air permitting bill because the communities have looked at this, have been, air permitting. So this is not, it's not comprehensive on every environmental issue. So the way that land permitting works, and you guys not everybody needs to know this. I'm going to answer the question, but you don't need to make yourselves experts in land use permitting. So with most of land use, there's a facility called the Pollution Control Facility that needs to go through local siting. And these are landfills, transfer stations, some of the biggest and baddest, worst folks that take in waste that would be pollution, although safely managed. And so those have to go through a land use procedure that's really close to zoning. So that the General Iron metal recycling facility has a little bit of that going on, but the real issue with the General Iron facility is the air permit, not you know, if there wasn't an air permit issue, this is an industrial zone site, it would be going into that site, you know, there would be some zoning things that happen at the city of Chicago. So that's not really the problem, is not zoning, it's the air permit.
Okay, thank you very
So,
much.
well, thanks. Paul asked if there's a companion bill in the state Senate. There is not yet. So I would just say that, you know, when you're talking to your state senator, we still want you to work on environmental justice permitting, but it's going to be coming from the Illinois House. Amalia, so for the definition of environmental justice community, I can point you to the bill, which I still need to send you some stuff after talking to you. It is in section 70 of the bill. So I think the we have a definition in it, and it is fairly lengthy. It does mirror, so it's the agency shall by rule establish a process for identifying environmental justice communities based on methodologies that factor socioeconomic, demographic, and environmental burden indicators, lists a ton of burden indicators, and then requires annual review and a process by which they can petition for designation, and involves the EJ Commission in it. So it's basically that is the EJ definition, but you know, the important parts are that it really is very close to what's happening with the Illinois Solar for All definition. Yeah, and Kim's putting these maps in, so perfect. Okay, Kim, do you want to add anything to that about?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, I would just say that the current definition that IEPA uses is very broad. It's very simple, and it does not allow for communities to self-designate, as I mentioned, or really think about what's actually happening in communities. And so the second link that I shared gives you a list of what are the environmental factors that are taken into consideration for cumulative impact, and then what are the population characteristics. And the argument really here is to say that communities are already overburdened and they don't need more pollution in their neighborhoods. And so how do we make that argument to say that, like, the Southeast side does not need another metal shredder, that Little Village does not need another warehouse, that McKinley Park does not need another asphalt plant, that X community in Cairo does not need another landfill, right? So, like, actually, how do we use this as a mechanism to actually not to stop these things before they even get into our neighborhood? Whereas now we have to fight.
Oops, I think your sound cut out and you're on mute again. There you go.
Sorry. So yeah, just wanted to add that these are the things that we asked, that we're asking the state to consider, and also force the local institutions, they'll have to look at citing, to have to consider too, in regards to, at the very least, air pollution and permits in the community. And so again, this is just a way to help IEPA dig in a little better around what makes up an EJ community and all the things they should be looking at. And I will mention that one of the things that we are asking for is not just for the cumulative impact to be included, but actually that IEPA somehow think about ground truthing the actual mapping. Because part of this is, if you only look at like EJ Atlas once a year, that doesn't get updated every year. It doesn't necessarily paint a current picture of what's happening. And nobody, quite honestly, knows better about what's happening in their neighborhood than the people who live there. So allowing community to be able to say, hey, I see on the map that you have listed these industries when in fact 2 of them have closed, or in fact 2 more have been built since then. So how does IEPA actually start to ground truth what they're seeing as part of these mapping? We're hoping that that's something we can get in, but we're still in the conversation parts of that. But just to give folks a sense of how we're thinking about expanding the definition that IEPA is currently using.
Yeah. So Jenny Castle asked, that it says the agency has to develop a procedure rulemaking. Do we have additional definition we want them to adopt in that rulemaking? And I think maybe Kim, you could add, but I think there's some improvements on the Solar for All work, but I think that's the best thing that we've done so far. So cool. Kim, could you take this? Do you want to describe what cumulative impact is?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, if you look at the second link and you scroll down, there is an actual layout. So the environmental factors, so the cumulative map basically says we have to look at a number of varying factors to understand how this community is being impacted. So to start with, let's look at what's the particulate matter? What's the ozone? What is the air toxic respiratory hazard index? Lead paint indicator, traffic proximity, proximity to Superfund sites, proximity to treatment storage facilities, wastewater. But along with that, how many folks in the neighborhood are low income? What's the minority percentage? How many have less than a high school education? Are they linguistically isolated? Do they have children under the age of 5? Are there a lot of adults over the age of 65? And really what this does is talk through not just what is this community and the makeup, but where are the most vulnerable in this community and how will they be impacted? And for us, cumulative impact really, again, takes a definition from just, oh, these poor people who are, are being, what's the current definition? They're not given the same rights as everybody else right now, where this is more than just we're not given the rights. We are systematically pinpointed as continually, not only are you not going to get rights, but we're just going to put everything in your neighborhood. And so at some point we had to say, look, the current definition that you're using, y'all don't even care about because our rights are constantly being violated. So like we're going to have to add more to it that actually requires you to look at all of these different factors and then say to us in our face, oh, actually, you're right. You all have too much of a vulnerable community, or you guys are already overburdened. And I say this because our neighborhood in Little Village has the second worst air quality in the state. Yet the state continues to allow, and the city continues to allow these things to come into my neighborhood because they don't have to consider that as part of the current permitting process. And so how do we start to force them to have to look at some of these things and actually answer to like, hey, if this is going to make our air quality worse, how is this helping our neighborhood? Right? If this development is coming in and has a bad track record, how is this going to help our neighborhood? Right? If this facility is coming in and they have massive traffic and we're already overburdened with traffic, how is this going to help our neighborhood? So it just allows us the ability to kind of fine tune the conversation from a 50,000 foot level to a really granular level of what is exactly is going to, hopefully what is actually going to be impacted in our community and how do we stop this from potentially happening? Hopefully that makes sense.
Great. Yeah, that's really great, Kim. Paul had asked if this bill is out of committee. It's kind of out of committee in that it was passed out of committee with different text. That's why we're looking at Amendment 1. So it is still alive, although it may look like it's a little bit dead next week when you talk to lawmakers. I will bring that up because it won't have met the third reading deadline that is this Friday. Just so folks are aware, it will not have met that deadline. But it is still something that we're considering and like working to get different vehicles to get heard. We just wanted to have something for folks to work on, etc. So Kiana, you asked about which type of air permits these provisions apply to. So I'm gonna have to get back to you on the bill because we've been going back and forth and I don't remember where we started in terms of air permits. Because we've been talking about cap and FESA permits, but I actually think the bill we introduced goes broader. So I'm gonna have to get back to you at which type of permits, but it's basically a lot of different major source air permits. Rick Steggy asked if the standing expansion would also apply to cave owning. No. So this doesn't fix the issue that we still have in other areas of law, like livestock operations or mining. It just fixes air permits. So piece by piece, we're showing them that the polar bears in Alaska cannot sue. So Art, your question, Kim answered in there. Isaac asked, does this bill affect the level of binding local control over the siting of facilities? No, this is just about air permits. Although there may be some local siting that is discussed later. The money for translation services and the creation of the project bank, IEPA is just going to have to pay. Well, actually, yeah, in our bill, IEPA just pays for the translation services. But I do think that we're working on something where the applicant would have to pay for translation services. And that's probably the most appropriate is for the industry to pay as long as it's done well. And then the creation of the project bank, IEPA will manage it, but the money there comes from permits, fines, and fees. We do have a one-pager. Okay. So Jenny Castle asked if we missed an opportunity if we don't get things like CAFOs and other water or land polluters. No, I mean, yes, but no. I I think that this is really a bill limited to EJ air permitting, and we should keep it at that. You know, I think if we bring in stuff like livestock operations or sand mining, we're bringing in opponents that otherwise are not going to get involved. Although I think like every industry is probably going to oppose this bill, but we're working on getting the political power we need to move it forward. So I do think we will pursue standing in other things as well. But I think the more we chip away at it, the easier it is to get done in other places. I mean, we had it added to fracking. We've had it added to another area of air permits through the Pollution Control Board, but slowly.
If I could just add, Jen, I think we totally understand that air pollution is not the only thing. And I think the way we're viewing this is how do we start, to Jen's point, chipping away at this, and like how do we start one piece at a time? Because it's quite honestly, like just having this conversation has been a couple years in the making. And so to be able to even get to this point, I think we don't want to like scare folks away and be like by having too much. And so we definitely see this as step one of starting to kind of make this argument across the board with other permitting and other spaces as well. So just wanted to support.
Great. Okay. Do other folks have questions of any type? We're happy to answer them now.
Jen, is there mapping for environmental justice communities statewide? So we're hoping to have a Solar for All project out here in McHenry County in Woodstock. So are there, you know, any more general statewide mapping of environmental justice communities, or has that not been done yet?
Well, there's an EJ screen. Kim, do you want to, because like the EJ Commission put a lot together for how the Illinois Power Agency interprets EJ communities. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so when we originally started the EJ mapping, it was our goal that it would actually be across the board for the Clean Power Plan. Because of the opposition by industry, it got condensed down just to the Solar for All program. But our idea is, and it's not perfect, please know, like it's not perfect. Like none of these computations and algorithms are perfect, but they're a start. And we're basing it on what we saw in California in particular, and how those communities were able to get real systematic change by just being able to identify their EJ communities through very similar algorithms and like mapping processes. So we spent a good amount of time working with NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council, and their staff were like Yukian, this is her thing, like mapping is what she does. So we spent a really long time working with her and the commission to look at, one, what were all the factors of information that are available in Illinois, which let me be clear, there are not a lot. Accessing data in Illinois is a struggle. And so just understanding what information is available and what can we use to put into the map. So we kind of went back and forth and actually had test runs of the Solar for All mapping program with these different factors to try to understand what communities get highlighted and what communities don't. And then that's really why, again, we allowed for self-nomination too, because we were like, look, we recognize that this is not perfect. We actually might miss some communities. And so how can communities come in and say, hey, I don't necessarily pop up on the screen, but here's a reason why I believe that we actually are an EJ community. So the Solar for All program, again, unfortunately, was very much limited to, or the EJ mapping was very much limited to Solar for All. But through this legislation, our goal is that we will actually be able to use it across the board. Originally, IEPA came back and said, oh, we'll just use the EJ screen or Atlas, the EJ Atlas. And we were like, those are too broad. We need to be more specific to what's happening in Illinois. So I can send over the link if folks want it for the map. But yeah, we did an immense amount of work as a commission and went back and forth with industry on like why this was a good thing, why this was not a bad thing. But like I said, the biggest point for them was keeping this specifically only for Solar for All and not letting it cover anything else. And now we were like, okay, we need to have this for the rest. Like we can't just keep this here. We got to use this across the board. So that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Hey, Cynthia. So there were some questions about hashtags. We're doing EJ4IL and CJ Can't Wait, as Katie put in the chat. Jerry asked a question about standing and whether a referendum on the ballot would make sense in the future. So in Illinois, referenda are not binding unless they amend the Constitution or they are about money. on a local level. And so even if you did a referenda question and it passed, it wouldn't become law. We do have another bill that's Ann Williams that is, I'm not going to have the bill number, but it would have binding environmental referenda. That bill is not going to move forward this year, but it might be something we look at for next year. I know Southwest Environmental Alliance has been really interested in that referendum bill. So no, we wouldn't be able to address this by ballot initiative. It's either case law or that. And I mean, we do have a constitutional right to a healthy environment. But I would say that there's never been a successful case under the constitutional right to a healthy environment. There's some factors that I think could lead there, and I'd love for somebody to do it, but it hasn't happened yet. Jenny Castellas, do we have a provisions or thoughts re who gets to decide on a community position to self-identify as EJ? Kim, do you have thoughts on how we'd want to see that process work? To self-identify?
I apologize. Yeah, I don't remember off the, and this is the one thing I didn't look at. I don't remember off the top of my head, but basically it's like, the thought process is like folks can just put together like their own argument as to like, here's industry in my neighborhood, here's here's why I think, like, here's the population, here's our income level, like, here's our health, I don't know, like status. So basically community members can kind of come to IEPA. Sorry, my puppy's having a fit. Folks can come to IEPA with a one-page description, if you will, with maps and say, hey, here's why I feel like our community is an EJ community. So there really isn't like a set application or like a set process. It's really just on communities to say, hey, let me list you arguments as to why I think we're an EJ community, and then they can start to engage with IEPA. We didn't want to set like any parameters to what makes an EJ community, because that's not on every community is different in that sense, and we can't speak to what other communities are dealing with. So we just felt like, look, just give folks the opportunity, let them come with whatever information they have, and we'll go from there.
Cool. All right, great. Any last questions folks have?
Yeah, I just had a question about like kind of how we should be talking to our legislators about it. So it seems like, yeah, like it's not gonna be moving forward this session.
No, that's not the case.
Oh,
We're
it might be.
We're trying to move it forward this session. It just we're trying. I mean, it may not, but it is our intention to move it forward.
Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah, but so like, and just trying to educate them about like why we need the bill as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So our fact sheet is going to have a few different examples of areas where this has been an issue. You know, the General Iron, it'll have a little bit about Matt Asphalt was this plant that was sited next to a school and like had almost no notice of just this huge air permit going through, and the community had no idea until it was too late. And so this is something, you know, these are some stories that we'll have on the fact sheet that you'll get, or stories from your own community, or other ones you've heard. Just how do we give people more transparency and democracy in terms of siting of large pollution facilities, I think is really important. But I think just in talking to your lawmakers, I mean, there is plenty of evidence that we've cited the worst polluting facilities in low-income Black and Brown communities, and not even just low-income low-income communities, low-income, middle class. Like, this is going in Black and Brown communities, and we need to make sure that we stop doing that in the future. So that is really what we're headed towards, is even just a bit more racial equity in where our pollution sites go. So that's a little bit of how you may want to talk to your lawmaker. Different lawmakers will be different, influenced by different things. I mean, you know, if you're talking to a Republican lawmaker, I might be talking about transparency and democracy and public participation, which are things that everybody wants. Everybody wants to be part of planning in community involvement. So those are the ways I'd talk to your lawmaker, but it is our intention to get it done this year. And your goal is just to get people to pay attention to environmental justice issues and let them know you want them to vote the right way and take action on them. I see that Ryan, you have your hands raised. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I'm kind of scared because you all have so much, you all are so smart. I keep saying that, but So I see the map that you put in the chat. Is there an interactive version of it that might give information as to the factors that went into declaring that more of a EJ area?
The NRDC one is the one you're referring to? Yeah, we don't have an interactive one, unfortunately. Like that was, our resources allow just that one map to be made, quite honestly. And so, no, unfortunately we don't. The next best thing I would say is probably the map from the Solar for All program. Might help give some indication, but yeah, unfortunately the NRDC map was kind of like a one-shot deal for us just because of how much it took to make it. And our goal had been for either the city or the state, as I mentioned, to kind of adopt it and start to put work towards it. So anybody could like go online and say, hey, how does the city think about this? Or like, what are the factors that they're considering for my neighborhood? And unfortunately, all the city did was take our map and replicate it. Instead of actually like investing into like the creation of their own interactive one, the community, they just ended up like doing their own research and came out with the exact same map in their current air report. So all that to say, no, unfortunately, there is not an interactive one, but our goal is to try to get one.
Is there a way that we could get access to the underlying data, like a KML file, to use that?
I can ask. Yeah, I'm going to put my email in the chat if you want to drop me an email, and I can ask Yukion, who created it at NRDC, and I can get back to you.
Yeah, and I did just drop the Illinois Solar for All map in there, which you can like look at your address and look about designated EJ communities. So that one is very searchable, and that should be a good proxy for what we want to get to.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan. So some people asked for some downstate examples. We did include Centerville, although like that one is actually not a great like air permit example. That's a really good example of disinvestment in communities. We may also add a little bit about the Metro East. There is one of the only incinerators, or like I think the only incinerator, I should add this to it, in the state is this Veolia incinerator, Cahokia Heights, I think. But just really a lot of a big, huge air pollution source, and they just expanded some of their permitting. So I think that one is a good example, and local residents had hundreds of people show up to the hearing and nothing happened. And then I know like both Normal, Bloomington Normal, Springfield, and Champaign-Urbana all have EJ areas. So so Jenny asked, do we include improved notice procedures, community members? Yes, there is some improved notice, but some of that I think would still be in the rules. We are looking for examples. So if folks have some questions about, or if folks have ideas about how to improve public participation requirements that we could do in statute, we are looking for ideas, especially in telling the IEPA what to do, et cetera. I think I missed a question about whether there's overlap between CEJA and this. And I would say like, the overlap is in looking at which communities are EJ communities. But I think that, they are very different in that CEJA is looking at how do we provide investment in terms of clean energy. And this one is really looking at the siting of new polluting facilities. So there is some overlap in that way, but they're separate. I mean, even with like what we're trying to do with the closure of like coal plants that are in EJ communities, those don't need new air permits unless they're expanding. So I don't even know that this would apply to future things. So like if Waukegan, somebody wanted to cite a big, huge something with the Clean Air Act permit in Waukegan, this would apply. So cool. All right, any last questions anybody has?
Yes, Nicole. I was wondering, you mentioned that you're going to have site examples, what have you. Is there going to be another updated fact sheet with those examples, or are we just using the fact sheet that was earlier referred to in the chat?
We will also have in the lobby day packet something with those examples that Sierra Club put together.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
I've actually just added those to our fact sheet, so throwing that into the chat once more.
Great. Thanks. Kiana, you want to go ahead?
Earlier you were talking about there not being parameters for when a community wants to apply to be considered as an EJ community, but are there limitations on IEPA? So they just can't outright reject a community?
So I think that's maybe for Kim. I mean, I think we're gonna have to have rulemakings on all of these.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense then.
Yeah, I was about to say that's a really good question, and I'm hoping through the rulemaking is where we can kind of define that, because definitely you want to make sure that they just blatantly can't just be like, no.
Yeah.
yeah, we can't have like Barrington applying that doesn't have any CAP permits. I mean, there's about 600 clean air permits in the state of big sources, of which about 200 are in Chicago. So cool. Okay,
I have a question.
go ahead.
Okay, so I'm looking at the report for on EJ screen for Region 5 for South Burley Avenue. And it gives, I think somebody mentioned earlier, it gives a variety of parameters. And those parameters include air parameters, but they also include things like lead paint, Superfund, hazardous waste proximity, wastewater discharge, et cetera. So my question is, other than whether those are in addition to air quality, are they land-based? But more importantly, is the data static? Meaning, is the data from a year ago and it's just there? You know what I mean? It's not changing.
In our bill, we would have an update, and that's exactly why we would want an annual update on EJ communities, because you don't know if is somebody going to stop using their permit? Is there a new permit or issue that's in there? So there would be an annual update of those, but it's on a yearly basis.
Okay, so yearly. Okay, thank you.
Cool, great. Any last questions? Let me check the chat here. Ryan, I'll connect with you on data. Cool. Anything else? Okay. Well, we're really grateful for everybody's support. I don't, Paloma, can you put here, I'll put the link, I'll put my email and the link to the CEJAN action alert. We'll put in there. So please, contact your lawmakers about this, but also join us for Lobby Day and ask your lawmakers to prioritize environmental justice communities. So here's the link. That's Lobby Day, and here's the CEJAN link. Amalia, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, quick question. The link that you put in, is that going to, who is that going to? Is that going to the governor, or is that going to our local legislators too?
Both. So you would type in your address and it goes to the governor and then to your state lawmakers.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll have this recorded for folks to listen to later. So thank you again for participating, and we are really grateful for your support.
Thank you all. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody.
This is great. Thanks.